the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of where you get
Before
to.
you'd come with so certain that if you just do this, it's going to be fixed. Right now, it's like, you're like, yeah, well, it could work this way, it could work this way, and then you really begin to trust God because, like, you got to get God involved in it. Your advices and your wisdom falls short, and so, yeah, no, it's true. But same thing comes to walking with God and hearing from God. First thing I guess I will start off with this is that hearing from God, seeing in the Spirit, and picking up information from the Spirit often feels very much the same because it's using the same faculties in the similar senses. So you have as an individual, as a human being, you have a spirit because we were created by the image of God. And so because you have a spirit, you have spiritual eyes, you have spiritual ears. And this is why even non-Christians, even without tapping into spiritual things and occultism, some of them have natural abilities to pick things up.
They're just like street smarts, discernment.
Yeah, discernment.
Yeah.
And some of them...
they call it street smarts, but it's like, yeah, they actually are pretty intuitive.
Yeah, and they're using their spirit to discern.
Yeah.
And so they might not know it, and some actually might be even very much in tune with it. We call them empath. They can feel emotions, or some of them even can hear thoughts or sense thoughts.
I think deja vu. They don't know why
deja vus and all this stuff. We're actually very much spiritual. And as a matter of fact, I personally believe the reason why very little Bible speaks, especially the New Testament, speaks of how to operate in the gifts of the Holy Spirit, how to operate in the spiritual world, is because back then the culture itself was very, very spiritual.
Crazy spiritual.
Very spiritual. Like seeing angels was normal. Seeing spirits.
Like, hey, some of you have entertained angels. Yeah.
Like even like you read in the spirits like, oh, like Peter's angel, they thought a spirit angel, and they were eating food, they wouldn't even get bothered. Like,
that's just Peter's angel.
Whatever.
Peter's at the front door.
Yeah.
No, that's just his angel.
They just continue to eat food like.
You're like, wait, what?
Well, a lot of us would just kind of read right past that, but this culture was so spiritual. It's kind of like this. If I'd ask, if I'd write an important email or a letter to Apostle Tom, telling him how to, about my life and tell him how to get to me, right, to Tri-Cities. And then I'll describe him and tell him how to use a car. Like, I'm just wasting ink on a paper trying to describe, like, it's a common knowledge. You just get in a car and you drive. I don't describe.
But 120 years ago, you would probably need to.
Yeah, but if I was writing to somebody else, I'll tell them, like, what is a car? Trying to explain the car, the mechanics of the car. Like, it'd probably even be difficult to explain how to operate and use the car.
You have to unlock it. You have to start it. You got to need gas. You need this pedal, left pedal.
And how to drive the road. Hey, stay on the right side, okay? We drive on the right side. Here's what the signs is and how you get there, right? And so to us, like, you'd be like, dude, I'm not stupid. Like, I drive the car every day. I know how to use it. Like, and this is why when it comes to spiritual things and spiritual tools and being aware of the spirit realm and being aware of spiritual things and angels and demons, all this stuff. Back to this is why Apostle Paul didn't even waste ink to write these things, because it was like a common thing. That's why he writes to some, and some of his epistles say, you lack no gift. In Revelation, God rebukes the church. And says you lack no gift. All the gifts are operational, but he rebukes them about other things. There was no sense of writing about how to operate in prophetic.
It's like passive. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, or 12, he's like, chapter 11, when you gather together, and one of you is going to prophesy, one is going to heal someone, one of you is going to get a word of knowledge, and we're like, please tell us more about
like how do you prophesy? Like,
how did that work?
Yeah, with the knowledge, what do you do? Like, for them, it was so common. For them, what it was is that they were so spiritually, their spiritual senses were so awakened and trained. All they did is that when they got saved, their spirit got renewed and their source switched. Not from the demonic, occultic.
Which is why we see so many people in Africa, prophet this, apostle this, doing miracles, doing crazy things spiritually, raising dead, all this stuff's not a big deal. And they're like, I used to be a witch doctor.
Yeah, so
and
it's something that you're like, I can see
now
the
I just
spirit.
learned
I can go through
actually
this portal, I can go this, yeah, those, and and that's why Apostle Paul in his writing mostly focusing on the theology and the character and how to behave, the understanding of the grace and all.
treat your wife and your children.
Yeah, treating your wife and your children, and how to appoint deacons and how deacons should be in the qualification.
But not a whole bunch on the school of the Spirit.
It's, not much. And
It's like, y'all know how to hear God.
Yeah, and so a lot of us, we kind of got that part in the Western culture, like figure out some of these disciplines, some of these principles, but now we're looking back on the spiritual things and we're like, what do you mean I'm going to be, when the Apostle Paul says that he need to rebuke somebody there, and he says that I'm with you, I'm going to be with you as to make sure like you do correctly.
Spirit, I'm going to be there.
And we're like, we just like either rush through it, we're like, yeah, I don't know what that means, and just kind of sweep it under the rug. We don't understand the aspect of actually traveling in the Spirit, and he was actually there observing them to make sure that they executed his tasks and his assignment correctly.
Yeah.
And he warns them out like, hey, make sure you do it, because I'm going to be with you watching over, make sure you
And
accomplish.
Philip was taken in the Spirit.
Philip was taken in the Spirit, and we just kind of read it over that, or we just think like,
Meaning, the Spirit said, go over here.
Yeah,
it's like, okay.
no, so-
or Elisha says, don't you know I was there when he came down from the chariot?
Yeah, things like that. We're like, what is that? And we're like, we either think like, oh, that just was back then, and it's not possible. But you have to understand the cultural background where they're coming from is so spiritual.
Saul gets too close to the prophets, and all of a sudden he's prophesying.
Yeah, it was so common, and so against that background, they're writing all these things, and so now we're coming into this into New Church Testament with very blind spiritually, no spiritual abilities.
Off of the 400 years of cessationism, John Calvin saying, hey, we can't do those things anymore. That's not for today, and so then we're Westerners, we're very influenced
dull.
by that.
Our spiritual senses are asleep. And it's like a spiritual muscle that you have to develop. And so now we come in and we're like, this is why we have to have these kind of talks and conversation like, well, how does God speak? Because we became very soulish. And even though we have the Spirit, but we don't even know how the faculties of the Spirit work anymore. And so
even a lot of people, I think, are shutting it down. God's trying to speak, and we're like,
yeah. And so, in where I'm going with this is that a lot of these spiritual faculties, your spirit, the giftings of God, they utilize those faculties to speak through us or to speak to us. And because those faculties are not developed, we having a hard time hearing from God, seeing what God is doing. And it's like a baby is born. The baby has a capacity to speak. The baby has a capacity to walk and all that stuff, but it takes time and training, getting those muscles built, getting those things, getting the mobility, getting those things worked out. And some do it faster, some do it less. And then when a person is not able to, we understand the person is sick and not developing correctly. But then so many Christians, in the spirit, they're just disabled. They either rely on a prophet, or they don't even believe that such a thing as prophets exist or people can hear from God. And so, against this background, we have to understand that there's a spiritual realm. There's a spiritual eyes and spiritual ears. You have the spirit man inside of you, and we have to learn to develop these sensations in the spirit, learn to interpret them, and understanding that God can use them to speak, but not everything that you pick up in the spirit is God speaking.
Right.
And so this is where a lot of people, newbies, and a lot of the extreme that you're talking about, everything that I think, everything that comes to my mind, any imagination, oh, that's God speaking. No, not always. It's you just maybe developed your senses, spiritual senses, and you have to understand in the spirit realm, you're naked. Nothing is hidden. It's kind of like the information floating up there, and you can pick up. There's no sense of time, past, present, and future. And it's some of the information you can just pick it up from from the information that's there, but that doesn't necessarily mean God is speaking. And oftentimes, the information you do pick up, God can use that to navigate and say, hey, focus on this. This is where the root of the problem is. Say this, say that. And it's this combination of both. But we have to learn how to discern and how to be able to navigate in a world in these things.